Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Stories from around the world are just proof positive of how similar we all really are. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brains, not only about their current projects, but how they got started, state of the industry, basically anything else we can think of in a very light and conversational manner. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, we hope that you do because you're listening to us right now. You can do that wherever your major podcasts are found: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, what have you. But you can also find us on social media. We'd love it if you'd follow us there. You can do that on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either @InTheSeats or at It's Podcast One. And finally, and I probably most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, and anything else in between that we can think of, really. Because we got a hard-working team, and we love talking about the moving image, and we hope you join us. But that transitions into this episode, because this episode is all about stories, really. It is a film called The Orphanage, which is premiering on Amazon Prime On Demand in the States. And it's the second theatrical release from an acclaimed Afghani female writer-director. And it's the second film in her 5-part series. It's called The Orphanage, and is from director Shahrbanoo Sadat. If I mispronounced that, I do apologize. But it's detailing the history of Afghanistan based on Anwar Hashimi's unpublished autobiography, and it really puts us into a very personal story about kids sort of surviving on the street in Afghanistan, and how their lives will center around the theater and scalping tickets for Bollywood films. And it plays with fantasy a little bit, but it also sort of highlights how influential the cinema is, and how influential Bollywood cinema is, if only geographically, because India and Afghanistan are not that far away from each other. So Bollywood cinema does play a big part of the cinema-going culture there. And we talked with Shahrbanoo about that, and so very much more. And I certainly hope you enjoy our talk, because I know I certainly did.
Thank you so much for your interest.
Well, first off, congratulations on the film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Can you walk me through sort of the inspiration for the story? Because while it has some very serious elements to it, there's obviously some very lighter and some sort of more entertaining elements to it as well, particularly with the Bollywood angle.
Sorry, can you repeat your question one more time?
Just
I lost you for a second.
What was the inspiration for the story? Because while it's obviously dealing with some serious elements, it has some lighter aspects to it as well, considering sort of the influence of Bollywood cinema to the film.
Mm-hmm. Well, this film, The Orphanage, is a part of a pentalogy of a big project of 5 feature films. And all these films, they're based on the diary of my best friend, Anwar Hashimi, who I met like 10, 12 years ago in a TV channel, where both of us worked there in Kabul. And I'm following basically his life from when he was a child living in central of Afghanistan to the time that he's, he comes to Kabul, and he ends in this orphanage. So Kodrat is somehow my friend's character, and the part from the Bollywood, it came from his life, because before he ended up in the Soviet orphanage in Kabul, he was a street child, and he was working and living in front of a cinema theater in Kabul, in the center of Kabul, and he was, selling cinema ticket in black market for Bollywood films. So he was a big fan for Bollywood, and and that part came directly from his diary.
Can you speak a little just to the sort of, because North American audiences don't necessarily understand sort of how big of an influence Bollywood films really are globally in terms of getting people to go see them, and just sort of how they really get expanded to, like, even in places like Kabul, which like I say, audiences, especially on the North American side of things, wouldn't necessarily equate to the fact that it would be a Bollywood picture as opposed to a Hollywood picture.
Yeah, well, in Afghanistan is not the only country that is so, you know, is so in love with Bollywood. I think in this region of the world, well, globally, but specifically in this region of the world, Bollywood has a very strong culture basis among people. And countries like Pakistan, India, like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, like these countries around India, they are completely drowned into Indian music and Indian cinema, and also there is this friendship between India and Afghanistan from very, very long time ago that made people so much interested in whatever is going on in India. It started from music from long time ago, and then it continued with cinema. And in 80s, during pro-Soviet government time in Afghanistan, that was a golden time for for cinema in general, but also for Bollywood films being screened in the cinema theaters, because that was a time, I mean, in 70s, it was great before Soviet invasion. We had like cinema theaters, and we had a real audience that they bought the ticket, they went to the cinema, they watched these films, and we also had like an Afghan cinema, but Afghan cinema on that time and now never could compete with Indian film. So whenever there was a release of an Indian film in Mumbai, for example, the next day it was a premiere in cinema theaters in Kabul. So people really, could track what's going on in Bollywood, and I think that's the reason that, like really, like with no exaggeration, above 90% or even 95% of whole like Afghan people, they are speaking the language, they are speaking Urdu and Hindi, just because they're watching so much Indian stuff on the TV and on videos and on cinema on that time.
Were they
So
original numbers
this
that you
is
had in the
something
film?
that, say it again.
The musical numbers, were they original, or did you pull them from other films?
No. They are original film songs. They are, because like I told you that 80s and 70s were the golden time for Bollywood. I mean, even now, if you come to Kabul now and you take a cab or you go to a restaurant or you just walk in bazaar, you hear all those film songs, and people, they know them. They know the lyrics by heart, and they're so popular. So I got those film songs from the super hit films of this character Amitabh Bachchan, who is a mega star. And on that time, he was young and he was like super famous. And in Afghanistan, he was, and also in India, of course, he was like a god. So whatever film that he played on that, it was like a super hit in Afghanistan. And I got these songs from the films of Amitabh Bachchan from 80s and 70s that was super hit in Kabul. I chose them from there.
No, they're fantastic choices. Now, I'm also very curious because I was struck by the film had a real honesty to it, and I mean, I'm in doing my research, I noticed that a lot of your actors didn't necessarily have a lot of experience. Can you talk to me a little bit just in terms of casting, and especially trying to find the right people to play
Mhm.
to play the parts? Because I can imagine, because when you're working with non actors, it definitely sort of brings a different level of authenticity to the film.
Yeah, I think I really believe that casting is the main part of the filmmaking, because especially in this kind of cinema, because if you write if you cast the right people, you will suffer less during the shooting or during working with them. And for me, I always invest a lot of time on casting, And for this film, it was easy because the leading characters, they are children. So where I could cast, it was schools, high schools in Kabul. So I chose the most crowded high schools in Kabul, and I did like I ran after paperwork of, I don't know, like insane paperwork for 1 year, just to to get the signature of official people involving in the ministries, to let me get into the schools. And after a year, I could finally do that, and I started to take pictures of more than 20,000 children all over Kabul. And the way that I cast it is, I do not talk to them at the first time, because obviously there are so many, and I can't really, they don't give me the time, and I also can't talk to everyone. And I don't believe that at the first talk, you can see the talent. I don't believe on that. So first, what I do, I trust my eyes. I look for the right face, and I took picture from the faces that I like most. And then at the second round, I cut down the number of the children to the one that I really love. And then I go back to the schools again, and I try to make a conversation with the selected ones. And the two main characters, Kodrat and the girl, Sedika, they were playing in my previous film, on my first feature film, Wolf and Sheep. I also casted them from the school in central of Afghanistan. So for these two, it was the second experience, but for the others, it was the first time being in front of the camera. And that was actually, like because if you cast them right, then they do not need to act that much. They're just being themselves in front of the camera. And also because during the production, I didn't really have a proper pre-production, because I was using my pre-production time dealing with visa stuff and paperwork and stuff like that, because I took my cast from Afghanistan to Tajikistan, this tiny country in the north of Afghanistan, where we fake Afghanistan, and we shot the film there. So we deal with a lot of paperwork and visa and like a lot of things that they don't have anything to do with directing. So I didn't really have the time to do rehearsing with them or to practice. So and also because the script was in English and they couldn't speak English, of course, but also like many of them, they couldn't read and write, even though I casted them from the school. But about the educational system in Afghanistan, how poor is it? So even when one graduated from high school, they hardly can read and write. So it was it didn't make sense really to share the script with them. So they discover the story little by little after each scene, and they puzzle it somehow on their head according to the shooting order.
Well, I mean, I think that's a credit to you, because this is very much a character-driven film, and I was impressed, especially when I was watching it, because films set in this period can obviously try to lean more on making more of a political statement and more of a commentary on, especially the Soviet occupation at the time. But this was very character-driven. How important was it for you to sort of not, I don't want to say ignore sort of the social and political ramifications of the time period, but to sort of really focus on making this about the characters as opposed to being about the time period?
Well, for me, when I was working, when I was developing this project, one of the challenges, it was how to make a film that is not political about a time that is the most political period in the contemporary history of Afghanistan. Because in 1989 to 1992, it was the time that Soviets, they finally left Afghanistan, and there was a lot of pressure on the Afghan government, and then it was this Afghan-Soviet war all around Afghanistan, but it didn't came to Kabul yet. And the Afghan government in Kabul, they were trying their best to end the war and to make this peace negotiation, actually, like the peace negotiation that is going on. It was actually started from that time, that Dr. Najib, he wanted to make this peace negotiation with Mujahideen, with rebels, and he worked on that for 5-6 years, but it didn't work. And in 1992, his government finally collapsed, and rebels, Mujahideen, they took Kabul, and then we ended with the 4 years of civil war, and then Taliban arrived in 1996. So for me, that was a time, that was like a super fragile time when Afghanistan somehow, Kabul at least, somehow was enjoying the last days of being happy. And like everything, like politically, everything changed so rapidly. And, like because because of all these stories around that time, it's really difficult in Afghanistan to make a conversation about that time, because whoever is talking about that period, they are taking a side. They are either taking the side of Mujahideen, either they are taking the side of Afghan government, or they're taking the side of Soviet. And we can never have a conversation about that time because it's so sensitive. It was a very sensitive time. And I was thinking that, okay, how I can make a film about an orphanage in Kabul in that time. Afghanistan is a cliche. Basically, Afghanistan is a cliche in the market, the way that we're making film around Afghanistan or any other war country. An orphanage is another cliche in the market. And there are so many films around orphanages. And imagine like an orphanage in Afghanistan, oh my God, it's like a double cliche, and this double cliche in that period. And I was thinking like, okay, I don't want to make a political film. It should be about the point of view of these children, because they are innocent and they are in this orphanage and they don't know anything about political situation. They're just living their life, and they only realize what's going on when they are facing the reality, like the end of the film. So for me, it was very important to picture this, because I relate so much with this position, because I think this is the position of ordinary people in Afghanistan, and they are the one who are paying the price for the war since it was started until now. And people are like struggling to survive, and they're living the life. And it's not like, especially I think in the war countries like Afghanistan, that war is going on for the last, I don't know, 43 years now. It is just, the war is not that big thing anymore, because the war is part of the routine and you have to live with that every day, and it is part of your everyday life. So you don't pay attention that much to the political stuff that is happening around you. You're just trying to find a way to live your life. And then you only realize what's going on when you are facing with that, like children. So for me, it was very important to picture this into the film and not talk about all this political stuff that was happening.
Well, I think you did an excellent job of that. And and I mean, this is something I always like to ask, because when it comes down to the film community, and I mean, I think this is true across the globe, that we all come to it as fans first. And I'm kind of curious, for you as a filmmaker and a storyteller, what ultimately inspired you to not just become a filmmaker? And I'm kind of curious, like, was there even a movie in your past that sort of was the pivot point for you to go, I need to be a storyteller, I want to be able to tell stories on the big screen?
Well, I had a different approach with cinema, because I came from a very religious and very conservative family, and for a very long time of my childhood, I only saw, for example, because I was born in Iran and I lived there until I was 11 years, and we moved back to Afghanistan after 11 September events. So when I was in Iran, I only could watch the Iranian television, and there is so much censorship there. You cannot really see a lot of things. And I never stepped in a cinema theater, because cinema was for, I don't know, going to cinema was a luxury. And my family, we belonged to working class, so we didn't have that money to go to cinema. So I didn't go to cinema. And when I moved back to Afghanistan with my parents, we went to central of Afghanistan, to Bamiyan, where my parents, they both are coming from there. And there it was like my first feature film. It was like a landscape, like wolf and sheep. It was really like a desert, a mountain with no, like nothing. It looked like in the middle of nowhere. And of course, there was no electricity. There was nothing. We didn't even have electricity to light the house. And we didn't have any TV, so I didn't even watch TV until I was 18. And then I moved to Kabul in 2008, the first time. And very accidentally, I ended up in cinema and theater faculty. And again, very accidentally, I ended up to be part of a French documentary workshop in French Institute in Kabul. And there, it was the time that for the first time in my life, I watched some serious movies. I remember I watched a film by Agnès Varda, the French filmmaker, and I related. For me, the cinema, it was never like, oh, I had this memory. I was fascinated to cinema. No, I was not. Actually, cinema was so far away from my life, and I never, as I said, I never stepped in a real cinema theater until I was 20, and that happened when I came to Paris, to France, the first time, and that was in Cinematheque. But before that, for me, I think that moment happened during watching the movie of Agnès Varda in Institut Français in Kabul, because I could relate. I think the film was heavy. I'm not sure if I got the film perfectly, but there was something that I realized. I realized on that moment that filmmaking is not about having an academic background, or is not about to get the skill. It is about the tales and the stories, and I knew that I have that story. So I was not really, I mean, this now I'm trying to analyze. Of course, all these things happened on my unconscious, but I was thinking at that time that I was not afraid to make film. Now I'm thinking that I had to be afraid because I didn't know anything, and I didn't know anything really. But I was not afraid because I could relate to the fact that filmmaking is about the stories, and I have stories. I think this was something that I
Well,
thought at that time.
and I mean, I think that's a beautiful answer, and it really does speak to sort of the universal power of the medium. And I think your film really does sort of speak to that as well, because again, it puts us in the seat of sort of these children and sort of being able to sort of appreciate the experience in the moment. And I look forward to the next chapter in this story and in your story. And I just want to say thank you again for the time today. This was a delight, and thank you so much for the film.
Thank you very much.
All
Thank you.
right.
Thanks so much.
Bye. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.